In the late 8th century, the misty coastlines of northern Europe faced a sudden, lethal presence. Raiders struck without warning, emerging from the fog to plunder coastal communities before vanishing back into the freezing waters of the North Sea. The attack on the monastery of Lindisfarne on June 8, 793, set the tone for the next 2 centuries. Because the primary writers of the era were the very monks targeted in these raids, their traumatized accounts of pagan barbarians became the only historical record, casting the Norsemen as a purely destructive force. Much of this reputation stems from the word Viking itself. In the Old Norse language, the term described a specific occupation, the act of seafaring or raiding. It was a job title, applicable to those who set out for plunder or trade, rather than a name for the entire Scandinavian population. Physical evidence paints a different picture of Scandinavian society. Most people were rooted in a stable agrarian life, farming, crafting, and navigating complex local politics without ever setting foot on a raiding ship. This raises a specific question about the era. Why did these sedentary, agricultural communities suddenly expand outward to dominate the map of the medieval world? Several internal pressures triggered the exodus. A population boom in Scandinavia strained the limited supply of good farmland nestled between the fjords, while ambitious kings began centralizing power and seizing the ancestral territories of local chieftains. At the same time, the wealth of Europe acted as a powerful magnet. Coastal monasteries and emerging trade centers across Britain and Francia were growing rich, yet remained largely undefended, offering a clear opportunity for those displaced from their homelands. The key to reaching that wealth was the clinker-built longship. By overlapping flexible wooden planks, Scandinavian shipwrights created a vessel that could bend and ride with the ocean's swell rather than fighting against it. As this diagram shows, the longship's true advantage was its shallow draft. This design allowed the ships to cross the deep Atlantic and then immediately begin navigating shallow rivers, giving the Norse the ability to strike cities hundreds of miles inland. In the West, these hit-and-run raids quickly transitioned into permanent occupations. In England, the arrival of massive fleets led to the establishment of the Danelaw, a vast territory where the Norse settled as farmers and craftsmen. Across the Irish Sea, they founded Dublin. What began as a fortified naval base quickly grew into an essential trade hub and the largest slave port in Western Europe. The expansion reached deep into Francia as well. In 911, the Frankish king granted the region of Normandy to the Viking leader Rollo. In exchange for the land, Rollo agreed to act as a buffer, defending the coast against other raiders. By the 10th century, the Norse had moved past simple extraction. They were now acquiring land and building states that would alter the political landscape of Europe for centuries. While some fleets looked for land in the west, others looked for trade in the east. These Swedish Norsemen, known as the Varangians, utilized their military skill to serve as merchants and elite mercenaries. This map traces their penetration into the interior of the continent. The Varangians rode down the massive river systems of Eastern Europe, primarily the Volga, connecting Scandinavia to the markets of the Islamic world and the Byzantine Empire. We see the scale of this trade in the archaeological record. Thousands of Arabian silver dirhams and Byzantine coins have been found buried in Scandinavia, brought back by traders who exchanged furs and amber for foreign capital. These Varangian settlements along the river routes eventually coalesced into the Kievan Rus. This early state structure laid the foundations for what would eventually become modern Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. As trade thrived in the east, a medieval warm period cleared the North Atlantic of its sea ice. This favorable climate provided a window for explorers to push further into the uncharted Western Ocean. They moved from Iceland onto Greenland and eventually reached North America. At L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland, the Norse established a foothold 500 years before any other Europeans. By utilizing these expansive routes, the Norse managed to stitch together a decentralized network of trade and settlement that touched 4 continents. The Viking Age didn't end with a collapse, but through integration. Over time, the Norse converts to Christianity and the settlers in foreign lands simply merged into the cultures they had once raided. In 1066, the era of the Sea Raider reached its symbolic end in England. At the Battle of Stamford Bridge, a Norwegian invading army was defeated, marking the last major Scandinavian attempt to conquer the English throne. In a final turn of irony, the English were conquered just weeks later by the Normans. These invaders were the direct descendants of Rollo and his Viking settlers, returning to England a century after their ancestors had first claimed land in France. You can still hear the linguistic legacy of this expansion today. Common English words like sky, sister, awkward, and they are all direct loans from Old Norse, integrated into the language during the centuries of settlement. Modern genetics confirms this lasting presence. Genomic data shows that Scandinavian DNA is permanently woven into the modern populations of the UK, Ireland, and across Eastern Europe. While the initial terror of the raids was a historical reality, the lasting result was the connection of isolated pockets of the early medieval world. By the time the Viking Age ended, the Norse had built a bridge of trade and settlement that spanned from the shores of North America to the markets of the Byzantine Empire.